Not too long ago, I made a video going over the worst adaptations of DC's biggest characters, and the video did really well, so I thought I'd make a part 2, this time including characters from before the 2010s as well. I didn't include them last time because I thought most TV shows and movies from before the 2010s are hard to compare to the current ones as they're a bit outdated, but also it's because I haven't seen most of the TV shows from before the 2010s. The only one that I saw, that being live action, is Smallville, and I watched that a very long time ago. And as for movies, they're either so bad that you can't compare them, or they're actually pretty good. However, I did get a lot of comments saying I should have included them anyways, so I will, but I haven't seen every single terrible movie, so if something is missing that you think should be on this list, it's because of that, but you could leave it in the comments down below. And also, not everyone on this list is necessarily a bad character, but every single character is a bad adaptation, which is not exactly the same thing, but most of the time that does boil down to the character being bad, but not every single time. Last thing is, this list is not in a ranking order just like last time. It's going from least recurring character in the comics, or least important, to the most. With all that out of the way, let's begin. The Arrow vs. Ryan Choi was promising initially. I think the actor could have been good in the role had he been given the right material, and I don't mind his costume, but the way he has been used has been so weird. He was so awkwardly used in Crisis on Infinite Earths, feeling so out of place among the Arrowverse's most important heroes, and he never even suited up. And then in his later appearance on The Flash, he was just so corny and horribly written, plus also very awkwardly placed, only appearing as the Atom in an alternate future timeline, all of which are just such unusual usages of a character who does have potential, but for now all of his appearances have led him to be a very bad adaptation. Blockbuster is basically Nightwing's arch-enemy, but on The Flash he's used as a one-off villain who has no lines, and his actor isn't even credited. Plus he has this really weird-looking suit, which kinda looks like one of those CGI motion capture suits. My theory is that they did want to give him a comic-accurate CGI form, but right before filming they realized they just don't have the budget for it anymore. They ran out of money, so they had to change the script. Regardless, even if this was the intention, it's a bad intention. This is not the same character in the slightest, as this is a dialogueless, one-off use of arguably Nightwing's arch-enemy on The Flash, and it's pretty ridiculous. So this is the third character from The Flash in a row, but actually there aren't any other in this video. It just so happened to be that the three least important characters from this video are all on The Flash, and this one is Mirror Master, or on The Flash she was called Mirror Monarch. The Evan McCullough version of Mirror Master is one of the most interesting Flash villains, and he has a very unique origin story and personality. Plus, the Mirror Master powers and the concept of the Mirror World have always been really interesting to me. I always wanted a version of Mirror Master to be a main villain on The Flash, and when it finally happened, it was profoundly disappointing. Not only did they gender bend the character, which is really odd, it's a really odd decision, but also they just didn't really adapt anything well, as she doesn't have the interesting origin story or the interesting personality, and the Mirror Master powers and also the Mirrorverse are used in the most boring way possible. Birds of Prey takes a lot of liberties with its characters, and while this isn't as bad as Cassandra Cain, who I mentioned in my last video, Mr. Zsasz was also a really bad adaptation in this movie. All the designs in this movie are really bad, but they downplayed Mr. Zsasz so drastically that he kinda just looks like a regular person who has a cut or two on his face. Plus, he doesn't act and he doesn't look like a deranged psychopath serial killer. He's kinda just like the number 2 henchman, or like the number 2 to Black Mask, which is so off. I said it before and I'll say it again, Wonder Woman 1984 is the worst modern day superhero movie, and its main villain, Maxwell Lord, or as he's called in the movie, Max Lord, is pretty bad. He isn't a genius, charismatic master manipulator like he is in the comics. Instead, they really just took the opportunity to make him into a Trump-like figure, which is pretty clear in his design. He's a greedy businessman, he's also a failed businessman, he's very poorly written like the rest of the movie, and for some reason, despite the fact that Pedro Pascal is a great actor, this is maybe his single worst performance ever, at least the worst one that I've ever seen, probably due to the bad directing. In the comics, Joe Wilson is a hero and member of the Teen Titans named Jericho, and he's a mute with the power to possess others. He was really well adapted on Titans, but on Arrow he's not mute, he doesn't have those powers, and he's not a hero. He's kind of just like Deathstroke Jr., which makes him a lot more like Slade's other son, Grant Wilson. If this was Grant Wilson, then it would be an okay adaptation, but seeing as his name is Joe and he's an adaptation of Jericho, it's awful. They got absolutely nothing right aside from the fact that his father is Slade Wilson. Jim Harper, aka Guardian, is one of the many heroes from the comics who's used as a one-off villain in the Arrowverse instead. Jim did at least have some dialogue and an overall story in this episode, so that does put him above the others in the last video, but this is still a gross misuse of his character, who's replaced by Jimmy Olsen as Guardian, which is something that if it happened in the comics would be so stupid. This was originally going to be about Cyrus Gold on Arrow, who's just a henchman for Brother Blood, and he never actually fully becomes Solomon Grundy, but then I remembered that Gotham actually did attempt to adapt Solomon Grundy, and it was awful. Not only did they completely just rename an established character who is an original character at the very last second, but also Solomon Grundy's design here is terrible. I mean, just look at it. It's a terrible, terrible design. Honestly, he could have just been on this list because of the design, and that's it. But, you know, if he was a good character in spite of his design, maybe he wouldn't have been on this list, but he wasn't used well at all either. He kind of just like becomes Solomon Grundy, and then he remembers his regular life and becomes a regular character again, and then dies, I'm pretty sure all in one season. It's such an unusual usage of this character who dies before Bruce Wayne becomes Batman. On a show with a lot of weird things going on. There are things that I don't fully remember, but I do 100% remember Gotham's Solomon Grundy, and he was really bad. On Arrow, Mr. Terrific was a quirky, usually incompetent, and male version of Felicity Smoke, who's a sidekick to Green Arrow, all of which is nothing like his comic book counterpart, where he's much more serious and is considered one of the smartest people on the planet, like in the top 3. I never hated this version of Mr. Terrific. Like I said, not all of the characters on this list are objectively bad. However, objectively speaking, he is a bad adaptation of this character, even if I do like his costume, and I don't think he was awful, but it's a bad adaptation. Steel is a pretty damn awful movie, and I think that's something that everybody agrees on. I mean, it has a lower rating than Batman and Robin does on IMDb. Shaq is a great basketball player, but he's not an actor, and the fact that he's like 7 feet tall makes the fact that he's playing just a regular guy in this movie feel so weird. The story and the writing of this movie are equally as terrible, and consequently, basically every single character in this movie is awful, including, and especially, the only character in this movie who is from the comics, that being Steel himself, John Henry Irons. Wildcat was pretty weird on Arrow. He appeared in just a few episodes in Season 3, where he was in the same age group as the modern-day heroes. He had none of the personality or that spunk or the backstory of Wildcat, and he wasn't even that good of a fighter. We saw him as Wildcat a single time, and he got beaten so bad that we never saw him again, and then people just thought that he died off screen. But nobody cared. Nobody remembers this character. It's a truly forgettable and really bad adaptation of a really cool character. The decision to use practical effects to adapt Killer Croc was a very, very bad one. He looks far too small and not nearly as scary as he should have been. King Shark in the next movie proved how much better Killer Croc would have been. Not only had he been CGI, but also had he had any personality or had he had anything to do, because in Suicide Squad, Killer Croc literally didn't do anything. I don't recall any of his lines, and I don't recall any of his actions at all from that movie. Killer Croc should not be this forgettable. It's ridiculous. I'm sure there are other characters from Smallville to include here, but like I said, I watched Smallville a pretty long time ago, and I don't really remember how I felt about every single character. I do remember, because Slade Wilson appeared in the last season, I do remember how I felt about this character, and he was pretty terribly adapted. He was aged up pretty drastically and turned into a US military general who doesn't like vigilantes. He's never called Deathstroke, and he never suits up either, so he's really not Slade Wilson. He's more like General Eiling. It's just a shame that Slade's first live-action appearance ever was so poorly done. Two-Face was perfectly adapted in The Dark Knight, but the immediate previous version of this character is one of, if not like the worst adaptation of a DC character I've ever seen. That might be my least favorite character in this entire video, that being Two-Face from Batman Forever. Tommy Lee Jones is miscast, and Two-Face is turned into a flamboyant, energetic, Joker-like villain who has no complexity or uniqueness to him in the slightest. But also, maybe the worst part of him is just he's so annoying. Every character in Batman Forever is so annoying, and Batman Forever might be like as bad as Batman and Robin, but out of all the characters from that movie, Two-Face is easily the worst. This one might be a bit controversial, but in my opinion, Jonathan Kent's story in Man of Steel is ridiculously mind-boggling, and I can't understand how they thought this was a good idea. The fact that Clark was raised to never reveal his powers to the world and not do anything with them, and he doesn't owe the world anything, is so backwards for Superman, who only works as a character because he's raised by kind people who taught him to do the right thing. The fact that he grew up to become Superman in this universe is insane, but also his death scene in this movie is easily the stupidest moment in Man of Steel. It teaches Clark nothing and was so easily avoided by like 100 different ways, which is the exact opposite of his great death in the first Superman movie, which teaches Clark that he can't save everyone because his father died of a heart attack. He was well cast, I'll give them that, but the whole concept of this version of Jonathan Kent is flawed. It's really, really flawed. Beast Boy is one of those characters who's not necessarily a bad character himself, but it is a bad adaptation, mostly because Titans was just not equipped to adapt Beast Boy, a character who needs a much bigger budget. Right off the bat, he's not green, only his hair is green, and I think they could have easily just painted him green for all of his appearances, instead of just the times that he turns into an animal. I get that it's time consuming, but they did it on Supergirl with Brainiac 5, and that had a lot more episodes each year, so if they could do it on Supergirl, they could do it on Titans, which has a bigger budget and less episodes. And Titans was really not equipped for Beast Boy's powers. He basically just turns into a tiger. He never turns into any other animal, and I don't think a tiger would be very helpful. I mean, any person with a gun can easily kill a tiger. What makes Beast Boy powerful is that he could turn into any animal at any time, so he can immediately go from one animal to the other. Something that on a TV budget like Titans, it is completely impossible, so they really just resort to Beast Boy using his fighting ability most of the time. Even the tiger, he rarely turns into it and just goes hand to hand. Like I said, he's a likable character, but this is not Beast Boy. They did not adapt the character well because they just were not equipped to do so. Beast Boy needs a movie budget, or maybe a high production TV budget, which Titans doesn't have. Also from Titans is Starfire, who, like Beast Boy, is not a terrible character, but she is a bad adaptation, as nothing about the character feels like Starfire, not her powers, not her design, not her personality, and like nothing feels like Starfire. They've made steps to make her more like Starfire, as initially she had fire powers, now that turned into energy bolts, even though it's blue for some reason. Why blue? Make it green like it is everywhere else. They gave her a costume and they changed her hair. Initially her hair looked pretty stupid in season 1, so they definitely have made steps to make her more like the Starfire we know, but her personality is so different that she feels nothing like Starfire regardless. Again, not a terrible character, but a pretty bad adaptation. The Catwoman movie is one of the most egregious cases of just not giving a shit about the source material. This Catwoman is named Patience Phillips, so technically it's a completely different character, as she's not Selina Kyle, and the movie uses Catwoman's unusual Batman Returns origin story of being revived by cats, which gives her cat powers. I don't like the fact that they did that in Batman Returns, but aside from that, that version of Catwoman is good. This one is not. She's a terrible character in a truly awful movie with terrible writing and some really unusual choices of things that they included in this movie. Catwoman is nothing like the comics and is just a terrible character in a terrible movie, but I think everybody agrees on that. John Blake was just a run-of-the-mill original character in The Dark Knight Rises. The trilogy was full of them. He was perfectly fine. But then, in one of his last scenes, he's referred to as Robin. His official legal name is Robin. Not Dick or Jason or Tim, his name is Robin. I get that Christopher Nolan was going for a more realistic take on Batman, and Robin might have felt a bit out of place, But honestly, no Robin would have been better than this weird misunderstanding of the Robin character, who's an adult police officer named John Blake. Oh, but also his official name is Robin. None of the Robins are named Robin. They're Dick, Jason, Tim, and Damien. What is this? Why did they do this? Why did they think this was a good idea? It's so weird. Oh, and actually, I don't understand the realism part, because at the end of the movie, John Blake is teased to become the next Batman, which is less realistic because he's just a police officer. It would have made so much more sense if the next Batman was somebody who was trained from childhood by Bruce Wayne, like Robin. Filmmakers have been steering clear of Robin for like 2 decades now, and I would love to see an actual Robin in the Batman, although I guess it's the next slot on this list's fault for tainting the Batman and Robin legacy. And finally, the last character in this list is actually going to be not 1, not 2, but 6 different characters, as it's basically the entire cast of Batman and Robin. Well, actually not the entire cast, since Alfred was actually pretty good in this movie, but I'm talking about the 6 main characters, the 3 heroes, Batman, Robin, and Batgirl, and the 3 villains, Poison Ivy, Mr. Freeze, and Bane. Batman, Robin, and Batgirl are not as bad as the villains. They do have these awful bat nipple costumes, the acting is terrible, and the writing is god-awful, but it's the villains who are truly some of the worst adaptations in DC history. Poison Ivy is overacted to hell and looks ridiculous, Bane is made into a brain-dead henchman, and Mr. Freeze's dialogue is 100% just ice puns. I dare anyone in the comments to tell me, just off the top of your head, a single line of dialogue from Mr. Freeze that isn't an ice pun. Hell, a single line of dialogue from this movie that isn't an ice pun, because Mr. Freeze isn't even the only character who makes ice puns. I don't think it's surprising to anyone, Batman and Robin is pretty universally regarded as one of the worst movies of all time, and it truly gave us some of the worst adaptations of DC characters ever, mostly the villains, but also the heroes. So that is it for this video. Another 20, or actually 25, characters from DC who are bad adaptations. Let me know in the comments down below if there are any more that I missed, and if you like this video, make sure to leave a like, share, and subscribe, and thanks for watching.